Since 2018, Mansions of the Future has been working with the Justice, Arts and Migration Network to reframe contemporary articulations of the migrant experience through the arts. This evening we'll see the premiere of It Takes a Decade, a short film by artists Natasha Davis and Jane Olson, part of the wider Big Walk project. Following the screening, we'll launch the Big Walk It Takes a Decade, a free publication by the Justice, Arts and Migration Network imprint, and also Destitution, Detention and Deliberations, one man's story of the Asylum System by Victor Mujakachi. Both are available in PDF format via the Mansions of the Future and Justice, Arts and Migration's website. I'll be sharing links to this as well shortly. The event's going to conclude this evening with an open panel discussion. We'll be joined by Tanya Akrofi, Natasha Davis, Victor Mujakachi, Jane Olson and Femi Oregon-Williams. And now to hand over to Steffi.
Thanks, Colette. And thank you to everyone who has made the time to join us this evening. My name is Steffi, and I'm one of the leads of the Justice, Arts and Migration Network. And I thank my co-leads, John Ernie in Hong Kong, Sukhmani Khurana in Sydney, and Kaya Davies Hayon, who's annoyingly on holiday and sending us pictures of herself on holiday as we speak. She's actually now of the national charity Belong and is starting a role there as a research director. So we're very excited for that and want to announce that as well. I want to thank them all for their practical support and their intellectual companionship over the past 2 years. I also thank all our contributors, the wonderful writer and editor Alison Smith, colleagues across the UK and colleagues in Lincoln for their moral clarity and their ethical approach to the world we share. I also know we have guests tonight from the United States, from Morocco, from Greece and from Wales, and maybe even Australia and Hong Kong. And thank you all for getting up early or staying up late. I would also like to acknowledge the many people around the world who have suffered detention and its long-term deleterious consequences for human security and well-being, and those who have taken the time to contribute to this project. The Big Walk started from a comment made by Rosie Huzzard from These Walls Must Fall. Rosie had been part of our 2019 There's No Place Like Home symposium, where we talked about best practice for academics, artists, activists, and people with lived experience of forced migration to work together for change. That was in the context of the Australian offshore processing debates and our collaboration with artist Hoda Afshar, Behrouz Bouchani, and Omid Tafigian. One of our decisions then was to stage a panel discussion of a situation much closer to home, the Immigration Removal Centre at Morton Hall in Lincolnshire, 12 miles from Lincoln. That panel, Stuart Crosthwaite, Tom Martin, Natasha Davis, Deirdre Conlon and Lisa White, brought our focus onto the damaging system of arbitrary detention and the highly problematic conditions in which detainees were held, sometimes for a few disorienting and frightening days, sometimes for months, and sometimes for years. Rosie challenged everyone in the audience who had not yet been there, either as a visitor or as a protester, to visit Morton Hall. The Big Walk was subsequently conceived then as a pilgrimage from Lincoln to the Immigration Removal Centre, in a collaboration between Mansions of the Future and the network, and Natasha Davis kindly agreed to lead it. We also ran a competitive process to bring in more creatives to the project and commissioned Jane Olson to work alongside Natasha and Alison Smith to work with us as editor of the book, which we're launching this evening. The walk was planned for the 26th of March and several trial walks took place before then. And I'd like to thank Holly. I don't know if she's online, but she did the first trial walk with me in the pouring rain. But of course, this is 2020 and nothing has gone exactly to plan. So the sadness is that we cannot stage the full walk, although you will find a map in the book to help you do it yourself in groups of no more than 6. We were thinking in March and April that perhaps we could walk in July or August, but of course that was also over-optimistic. The better news is that Natasha and Jane took on the challenge of making a film of the walk you would have taken with us. I have seen the film, and all I'm going to say, because you're going to see it soon, is that it is quite lovely. Now, all the biographies of the participants are online, so I'm not going to spend time now on this, but I just wanted to say a few words of welcome to Natasha and Jane. Natasha Davis, who is with us from Berlin, is a performance and visual artist who creates poetic and challenging interdisciplinary material exploring body, memory, identity, and migration. Her work is non-linear and based on rigorous research and the interpretation of personal histories. She was born in Croatia and is now based permanently in London. Jane Olson is a classically trained performance pianist and a sound artist and composer. Her work as a composer is inspired by the complex interactions we have with our environment. She creates spoken word with carefully crafted soundscapes of recorded sounds and acoustic instruments. So again, thank you all very much. There's about 75 of you out there, which is quite terrifying and wonderful. And so thank you for being with us. And I'm now going to hand to Natasha and Jane to briefly introduce their film. And as Colette said, we will then share a Vimeo link in chat with you, and so you can watch it with us. Thank you.
So there's barely anything. Thank you, Steffi, for this lovely introduction. There isn't really much that I want to say. I'd just like people to watch, and then we can have a conversation after that. But just to say that this is probably although a performance art is my main medium, I also write, I make films, but I must say that this is the first time that I started making a performance piece, but ended up having a film. It's been an interesting process that I've enjoyed, and something that really helped is that the collaborative team has been fantastic, and this is probably the single biggest thing that has made this project possible. I've enormously enjoyed this cross-disciplinary way of working, and also I loved working across the art, the migration, NGOs and academia. This is probably the first year in more than 10 years that I actually haven't been teaching in higher education. So it's been fantastic to preserve the relationship with academia via this project. Over to Jane. I hope you enjoy the film.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, I can only second really what you've said already. It's been an amazing process right from the very beginning, working in this collaboration in performance art, which I've only really experienced as a member of the audience. So I was pretty terrified at the prospect of having to actually perform. So in some ways, I've got an easy deal here with the film. But I have to say that the film's turned out to be wonderful, and I think that the process has been so special for me, and I've grown an awful lot as an artist working with Natasha, and I think you're all going to enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Steffi and Natasha and Jane, for your introductions there. I'm about to post the film link in the chat box just to say we've got a few people here who are messaging Victor, who is here. Hopefully you can see that, and he might be able to stick around and chat to people who, I know some of you can't stay till the end, which is when Victor's going to be speaking after the film about his book and then during the panel discussion. But yeah, just to say that Victor's with us and we can share any other information afterwards. So please stay in touch. We'll be sure to share some details at the end. I'm going to pop the link in the chat now. So anyone who can't see it, just drop us a message. The film itself is 20 minutes long. So what we're asking is that everyone kind of just minimises their Zoom screen, launches the link obviously and watches the film, and then we're going to rejoin here in 20 minutes to have a bit of a chat with Natasha and Jane, where we'd like to invite you to ask some questions. So pop in the link in now, which will take to Vimeo. Myself and the rest of the panelists will be on mute, so you can't hear us while you're trying to watch the film. So like I said, I'm going to pop myself on mute now, but I'll still be here to respond to any kind of technical queries. So thank you. Hi everyone, hope you can hear me. Sorry if I'm interrupting the end of the film for a few people. We're just about coming to the end of the kind of allotted time slot to watch It Takes Decades by Natasha Davis and Jane Olson. The film itself will of course remain available via the Vimeo link that's been shared, which I can share again a little bit later, and we're also going to embed it into the event page for this evening on the Mansions of the Future website, so you'll be able to watch it there. But if people want to kind of start rejoining us in the Zoom, it would be really great to have a few questions from obviously audience members, but also any panelists who have any thoughts they'd like to share or anything they'd like to ask Natasha and Jane. I'm happy to kick off, but if anyone else wants to jump in, please do. Well, I'll just start things off, but again, please do use the chat box or the Q&A tool to ask any questions for Jane and Natasha before we move on to the book launch section of this evening with Steffi and Victor. So Jane and Natasha, just thank you so much for sharing your work with us this evening. I know it's been a very interesting process, as mentioned, with regards to making a film out of what was intended to be a walk. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts that you want to share on that process, or how any of your own experiences or interests or this kind of journey within this project has shaped what we've just watched together. Oh, Natasha, you're on mute. If you could unmute, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, sorry.
That's
Yes, I don't know what Jane thinks, but I think the ideas haven't really changed from from the moment we started planning a performance walk. It doesn't feel that the ideas have changed and all the elements are there. Luckily, because we actually managed to walk before COVID-19 kicked in. So the visuals, the knowledge of, the route, the conversations with people, the panel we had at the mansions, all the work that we did before was there. Mm-hmm. So it was really just about mapping the process in a slightly different way. But it's been exciting doing it in that way because new people came in, people who were behind the camera, 4 new people. So that's been a really exciting process. Then you have more individuals and their own views. There's something that I imagined what it will look from behind the camera, but it looks slightly different. There was something more to work with.
Thank you, Natasha. That's really useful. And obviously, Jane, please feel free to chip in as well. But just we're getting a few questions and thoughts through on the chat. Very powerful film. Thank you so much for sharing some of your story in the film, which is a very pertinent point. And we've also got, thank you, that was inspiring. What were some of the artistic influences that inspired your approach to the film, which I think leads on nicely to what you were saying about being behind the camera there, Natasha, as well. So if either of you want to answer, Robert's question about artistic influences that inspired your approach, that'd be great.
Oh, so many, so many in terms of the film, excuse my throat. It's not COVID, hopefully. In terms of the film, probably films like My Winnipeg, lots of documentary, autobiographic filmmaking, but a lot of the influences are, of course, from performance art. And it very much continues on the body of my own work, excuse me. And a lot of literature as well, and poetry, and different ways of telling stories.
That's great. Thank you, Natasha. It's interesting that you mention poetry as well, because obviously the storytelling that runs throughout the film, which kind of both complements and contrasts beautifully with kind of visuals, many of which, as you say, you were able to include images taken during a kind of practice walk, and then kind of embed some footage that you were able to film kind of in and around isolation. So it's really great that you was able to touch on that. Just got another question here from SciMag. Thank you. we're not supposed to know about immigration detention centres. That's why they are hidden away in beautiful countryside ex-prisons or ex-RAF bases with, as you say, no signs. One of our jobs is to highlight the fact that they exist and what happens to people in there with film, literature, as well as protest. That's a very interesting point there, and again something that I think you were able to touch upon both of you within the film, with Jane's section as well, about the kind of English country garden and this kind of questioning about I guess the question of why they're in those locations is really obvious, but it was something that we wanted to kind of to tackle with the project, to raise that awareness. Many people living in the locality who aren't aware of their existence and therefore aren't aware of the the lives within.
Definitely. I mean, it's really, I know that one 20-minute film cannot change the perceptions and cannot suddenly turn detainees into people who are, seen as equal to everyone else and not marginalized and so on and so forth. But, I think every step is important in unveiling that invisibility. And this is all of us who walked. This was all the comment, like, we wanted to see, where is the sign for Morton Hall? It just doesn't exist. And of course, it's deliberate. And in terms of what you mentioned about Jane, I'd love Jane to say something about her fantastic episode, which is really, it was so wonderful to work with that aesthetic and to place it in the center of the film as something that breaks away from the narration before and after, but also Jane and her, very English voice and the position from which she can actually make comments that she made in her beautifully written text, which is so telling. The English garden and what the ingredients of the English garden are, and the value that refugees and asylum seekers and migrants and newcomers bring to the country, bring to the English garden. Jane, would you like to say something about it?
I suppose so. Yes, I was saying yesterday that I'd never expected this journey to take me to Doddington Hall in a pair of clogs. It was kind of, but then it just seemed so obvious that that's what I needed to do. And I hope I didn't offend any clog dancers out there, because it wasn't terribly technically precise, but I did my best. And it just seemed, what is it that everyone is so, not everyone, but some people are so desperate to protect? English traditions, which I was demonstrating one of them, the Lancashire clog dancing, and all of the cottage garden flowers that we know and love are so English, but they're not actually English. I think only one of the plants mentioned in the song actually originates or is native to England, and that's what we are in England. It's in Britain. It's a real melting pot of so many different cultures and so many different influences, and that should be celebrated like the English country garden, that we're all such a wonderful mix. That's kind of where it came from, really.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jane. Got a couple more questions. I'll get to Fadma's in a minute, just because we've got one from Rosie, which kind of follows on from what you were just saying, Jane. So as an ex-clog dancer, and my sister is a professional clog dancer, yes, got one in the room. I wondered if the process to that coming into the film as a working class dance form from the north/factories, it was interesting to see they're juxtaposed with the big stately home. Really appreciated the presentation / questioning of the Englishness there, and you did great. Good shuffles. If you had any more to kind of to add to that, I mean, obviously Rosie's just touched on a few of the comments that you made, and obviously again the idea of a working class dance, factories, the juxtaposition there of the stately home, which, as you said, at first you kind of would never think you'd be doing that on a day in perhaps August, but then within the context it seems so clear to you for that's what you had to do for the film.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks very much for for letting me off. I couldn't believe researching clog dancing as well. I only really, it was as a result of the lockdown. Hannah James did a series of workshops, so I have to say a big thank you to Hannah for that. So I did a series of workshops and learnt some basics and tried to do as best I could. But I wanted the clogs to be the percussion, and that was one of the things about clog dancing. The sounds were meant to replicate the mills, the sounds that you'd hear in the mills. And researching the origins of clog dancing in the UK, I was interested to find out that men used to do illegal clog fighting, which sounds quite horrible. But some of these English traditions are, possibly best left well alone, but not the clog dancing. That's brilliant.
Thank you, Jane. As I mentioned, we had a question from Fadma, which I'll scroll back up to before I lose it. Just said, great, thank you. The body is very present. How can you combine the first messages on the film about imagine to try to engage publics on how to embody the experiences of the other? If either of you two have any response to Fadma's question there.
That's a really great and interesting question. And it's something that I've been interested in for many years through something that I look at as shared autobiography. I mean, autobiography is always personal. How do we share it with someone else? And it's, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that the body is very present, and it's also, the body is present probably also because in some aspects I embody these issues, but I think it's about finding a way how through. I think I just find the body a really powerful tool to express something that is quite visceral, something that can reach out to somebody else who maybe wouldn't have gone through that experience, but body is a medium through which that connection can be established, because we all know what the body is. We know how body hurts. We know that when we cut ourselves, we bleed. We know what a toothache is, and so on and so forth. And I think possibly for that reason, body has always played an important part in working out through the messages in my artwork. And it's also body is mine, and the personal story is mine. So they go together hand in hand, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thank you, Natasha. That was a great explanation and a great response to a really interesting question there. We've got some more thoughts here for you both. So we've got one from Emily. Really moved by your piece. The invite at the beginning to imagine was so powerful, to consider the paths and routes that are so British looking as paths that might be taken for safety. The tensions and vulnerabilities in the performance, really incredible. Thank you. So again, that idea of paths and routes, and obviously the idea of the map and the journey and the locality and the geography, which are all kind of methods of framing the work and are explored through it. I don't know if Natasha or Jane, if you've got any more to say on the idea of paths and routes to safety.
I really love that comment, and it's just so much I was thinking more when I was editing and when I was looking at the piece when it was finished than when I was making it or when I was taking walks. But just that idea of trees as something being so rooted in a place and so different from all the stories in Morton Hall, from my own personal story. And so it kind of provided like, I don't know, this strange disembodied contrast sort of atmosphere and background to the story. And if you remember that piece of cloth with flowers, embroidered flowers, and flowers also as something that is rooted in the rooted in the soil, rooted in the ground, lying on the soil. This is something actually that I embroidered in my early 20s when I was living in Greece. The country, Yugoslavia, that I come from was just starting to fall apart. And it was a gift from somebody, and I started embroidering, and that contrast between embroidering something that is so rooted and my personal situation, which is everything exactly the opposite. I found it very powerful at the time, and I find that tool useful. And useful in relaying messages, something that is completely the opposite from, you know, the visual environment that is completely the opposite from what you're trying to say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Natasha. I think that ties in nicely as well to a comment from Abigail, who loved the English garden section and challenging notions of Englishness and how it is reinforced by ideas about nature. Again, you know, with comments, as you and Jane have both mentioned, obviously Jane had suggested, or had spoken a little bit about the idea of the native flower. I don't know if, again, either of you want to touch upon, again, this idea of Englishness and nature and how they were kind of interwoven within the film. Jane?
Well, yes, I suppose so. It was really an emotional response to a conversation, an overheard conversation, where I just felt like I wanted to say something but couldn't, in one of those situations in a restaurant. It's none of my business. Other people are talking, but they're discussing the Windrush that was happening. The second plane was going out at Windrush 50, and they were completely filtered by the tabloids, and their opinions were just straight out of a tabloid newspaper. And I was quite upset, you know, this isn't the case, why are you saying this? But I was dining on my own, I'm not about to go and challenge a table full of 10 people. But so that was really my stimulus for a lot of that episode. My response, really, what is it that you're so desperate to protect? Is it the tradition of clogging? I'm sure none of those people on that table had any idea about a lot of English traditions. So yes, that's kind of where that came from, where it stemmed from, and we talked about that when we jammed together, Natasha and I, and
Yeah, definitely. There were so many useful conversations with Jane, so much that, you know, a lot of it that of course didn't go into the film or could never go into the film, or the film would be, you know, the length of, I don't know, 3 seasons of 10 episodes each. But actually that conversation, I remember it so well. I actually remember because Jane wrote down the lines, and I actually remember the power of these really horrific lines that we heard. And some of it, that conversation largely informed the text, you know, that lists relentless possible number of reasons, all horrible, all very similar, why people have to leave, and no matter how, and go somewhere else, and no matter how horrible the reasons are, they're just taken so lightly, as if the reason was, oh, I was just bored at home and I wanted to go somewhere else. So some of the sentences from that conversation actually went straight into the text.
It's really interesting to hear a bit more from both of you about how that kind of collaboration came together, because obviously, you know, you have met and you have been working together within the same space, and obviously, you know, you continue to work together on the development of the film. We've actually got to hand over in just a moment to Steffi and Victor, but I think there's a few nice comments here just to say, you know, from Tom, who obviously watched the film with us and said that he felt as if we had walked together. And obviously, you know, the film is, it's a piece of work, it's a piece of artwork, but it's also a tool with regards to, you know, walking people through the walk. And we hope that people can, you know, when it's safe to do so, make the walk, you know, from wherever they might be, or even from Lincoln Castle as intended to Morton Hall. And we've also got a few other comments about Morton Hall actually closing as a detention centre. And I'm scrolling down, it's too much to carry on with, but we've got some lovely things in the chat here which will also be saved along with the audio and the visual, so I'll try and find a way to share this, because there's obviously some great comments and really important things being shared here with the panelists and the attendees. But I feel just to keep on track, I should hand over to Steffi and to Victor, and just to say thank you both, Natasha and Jane, and thank you everyone for watching that brilliant piece of artist film, It Takes a Decade, which, as I mentioned, is obviously available on Vimeo, and it's going to be embedded into the Mansion's website. So we hope that you can continue to watch and to share. But thank you both, and yeah, now to Steffi and Victor. Thank you.
Thank you. Myself and Victor, we are launching 2 books tonight. One of them is in hard copy as well, but I'm afraid in a limited edition, so you can just look at it here. There you go, hard copy. But the PDFs are available, and at the back of the book there is a map of the walk and the episodes in Natasha and Jane's work, so you can look at it again there online. I won't talk for very long because you've already heard from me, but I just wanted to say a few things in launching the Big Walk, and then I'm going to hand over to Victor to talk about his book. So these 2 books are the first 2 books in the Justice, Arts and Migration imprint, which is from the University of Lincoln. It's also related to the Lincoln Institute for Advanced Studies, and we thank Stuart Humphreys for his help in setting up the network. The most precious £10,000 ever. It's kept us going for 2.5 years. So we love you, Stuart. You're great. We'd also like to thank the University of Lincoln for their support, Mansions of the Future, of course, for all their support, particularly Colette, but also Beth and Kerry and Barv. And of course, Claire Cumberledge, who was there right at the start. The book, the Big Walk book, is edited by Alison Smith, who has been with us, first of all, as a participant in the workshops we ran with Hoda Afshar and Daniele Pantano back in April 2019 in our first show at Mansions of the Future, where we screened Hoda's work Remain, and we also talked to Behrooz Boochani, the author of No Friends But the Mountains, and his translator and collaborator, Amita Vigian. So we again thank all those people. Alison came with us then as a member of the Lincoln public into planning the Big Walk, and she's been central to that process, and she also took on the editing work of the book, and she's a very firm editor and has been extremely good on making us pick up some typos all along the way. So thank you. I'd also like to thank our designer, Abby Goodman, who's designed both books for us, and as you will see when you look at them, has done an extraordinarily lovely job. All I really want to say in launching the book is to perhaps give a couple of quotes, because you can read it for yourself. But these quotes are not from the book. They're really about where we came from in thinking about this project. So one is from the artist John Akomfrah, who also, as you know, is a very important British filmmaker. And he says, talking about his work, one is aware that there are certain emotional recognitions one couldn't make about the sojourn in this space without taking on the very question of space. And what I think Akomfrah, or one of the things Akomfrah is saying in that, is that we need to know where we are and who we share our places with, and where we have been and where we are going and who we are going there with. And really the point about the Big Walk and the point about the project as a whole has been to consider our relationships with one another in this space that is called England. It was also this space that was called England and the Australia offshore processing, but for this, it's about England, this very confused and unhappy island that is also a home to all of us here today, and we need to hold hands in that home in order to remind people, like the people that Jane was listening to in her restaurant, that you cannot pick and choose in humanity. We are here together and we must look after each other, because no one will look after us if we don't. It's just basic humanity stuff. I'd also like then to just read a little bit from Frederick Gross, who wrote a book called A Philosophy of Walking. And I've read a lot about walking in the past few months. And he writes about the pilgrimage. You can hear a funny burring noise in the back. That, of course, is what is called an academic cat who wants to get in on the action. So just, I'm going to let her out. I absolutely knew she would get in on this at some point. I'm sorry. So this is from Frederick Gross about about pilgrimage. He talks about the pilgrim leaving their place and starting their journey. And he says, on the occasion of the induction, the pilgrim would be issued with a covering letter to serve as safe conduct during the journey, giving entry to monasteries and hospices that he would pass en route. And also, it was hoped, protecting him, we could add, or her, from highway robbers who might leave a consecrated walker alone for fear of punishment from on high, from God. The ceremony was very solemn and grave, because this departure was like a small death. And then he goes on to say, so why did they go at all if the conditions were so difficult? Of course, the motives were numerous. In the first place, to augment devotion, to bear witness to one's faith. Because above and beyond, the primary reason for the pilgrimage was to have a certain goal, to understand the human condition of wandering through this vale of tears. And although what Grace says doesn't speak exactly to the pilgrimage from Lincoln Castle to Morton Hall, because there are so many different positions in that little piece of writing there, what it does is remind us all that as migrants, as pilgrims, as people, we are taking this road together. And some of us have a very fortunate road and some of us have a less fortunate road. And as Natasha said in the film, at different points in our lives, we will be at the beginning of that decade or at the end of that decade. And at some point that decade may seem a long time ago, but for some people right now, it is still going on, or it is still, it's just about to start, and perhaps particularly for children. So, so I hope the Big Walk project and the Big Walk book will just help us focus a little bit. I know many of the people in this Zoom room focus on this very bravely and very continuously, but that is the reason for the book, and I commend it to you. And I'd now like to pass over to Victor.
Good. Oh, thank you, Steffi. Thank you, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for having me on this occasion. It's quite flattering being referred to as an author, because this is the first time I've written something that has been published into a book. I know from my school days and college days, I used to have this flair of writing, but I never thought I could write anything that could be appreciated by people at all. And I've also had this view that authors are very distant, remote people whom you can communicate with just through books. And even before I came to live in Sheffield, I'd never even met an author in flesh. But it's only when I got to Sheffield that I met the likes of David Price. I was in Sheffield, a renowned author. I met Gina Clayton. I met Duncan Froggatt, Ingrid Hanson. And that's when I started relating to authors and the real authors and the work that they do. So because I'd spent all my working life in banking and finance, so this is really something new. So back to the question, why did I write this book? There's a lot that is gone into it. It's not a big book. It's a book that is 3 short stories, and a lot of work has gone into it. And it has all been about teamwork. The team at JAM, Colette, Alison was the series editor, Abby, and Steffi. All contributed into making this book what it is. And there were quite a lot of other people who did the behind the scenes work. A lot of proofreading was done by Rosie Hazard, Reverend Liz Wills, Tim Neal, David Price, the author I mentioned earlier on, Catherine Warder, John Mello, and last but not least, Ingrid Hanson, who did quite a lot of work in editing and making a lot of suggestions, and even giving the title to this book. When we were discussing about the title, that is Ingrid and myself, I requested that we have something that is alliterative, and my initial suggestion was to give it the title for Trials, Travails and Tribulations, and then she came up with Detention, Destitution and Deliberations, which is quite fitting in terms of the theme of the book. So why did I write the book? I did so when I got into detention. I was arrested, put into detention by immigration authorities with the view to sending me back to Zimbabwe after my asylum claim had failed. I'd made 3 previous asylum claims and they all were turned down. And whilst during that process, I had a lot of questions. A lot of questions were flooding, coming through into my mind. I was asking myself, why am I being treated this way? Why am I being disbelieved? And a lot of things seemed to be disjointed. I just didn't understand why. And because the treatment I was receiving was not in keeping with the way we view the United Kingdom and Europe when we are abroad. We often view this country as a country that is welcoming, a country of James Bond, the country of the Queen, and the country of justice and fairness. And I'm sure you also know that even when the Windrush generation came to this country to help contribute towards the building of this country, they often referred to Britain as the mother country, which means they had pride in getting associated with the country. But when I was going through the immigration process, it felt that I was being given a totally different treatment. And the crunch and the moment of epiphany, actually, when all things sort of came together, was when I was put in detention. And my period in detention, which was only 5 days, was a kind of an opening up moment when everything started linking up and knitting up together. And there was this connectedness, which sort of turned into a pattern. And it was during this time that I realized that everything that was happening to me and other asylum seekers had a pattern to it. The hostile environment, the racism, the rigid immigration process, the asylum process, and everything, the slavery, colonialism, and everything else had a pattern to it. It was just the behavior that I had experienced was not disjointed at all. There was a link. And whilst I was in detention, all these things made sense. And ideas started coming over. And I remember whilst I think it was my second or third day at Morton Hall, I just felt that whenever I came out of detention, whether I ended up in Zimbabwe, as was the intention, or I was released, my intention was to put everything down in writing, all the experiences, and this included historical situations which were linked to the present situation that I was going through, along with other refugees and asylum seekers. And it all made sense. And of course, I'm sure quite a few people know that, a large number of people know that I did not stay in Morton for a very long time. I stayed there for 5 days. There was this massive petition that was launched for my release, and that put a lot of pressure on the immigration authorities, and they had no choice but to release me from detention and back into the community. And as soon as I was released, I just was inspired to write the main story of this book, which is entitled I knew you would not stay here the minute I saw you. Ideas just started flooding into my head. I wrote about in the story about colonialism. I wrote about slavery. I wrote about the Windrush. I wrote about the colonization of Australia, and then at this time I was writing about writing this story. I also read an article about Beruz Buchani, who had also published his book No Friend But the Mountains. And that spurred me on. When I read that article in The Guardian, I realized that his story kind of mimicked mine, although the experiences were different, but there was a similarity. And incredibly, through Rosie and These Walls Must Fall, I was able to meet up to talk to Beruz Buchani in February this year via a video link. It was quite a surreal moment. Talking to him, I was given about 20 minutes for me to have a chat with Beruz Buchani, and I also had the privilege of talking in person to the person who translated his book, and that was Omid Tofigan. So it's been quite a journey, and in the book I also included short stories that I'd been writing over a very, very long period and saving them. And those stories also relate to the asylum system, to the lives that asylum seekers go through on a daily basis without the larger British public knowing that what these people go through. So yes, I've had quite positive feedback from people who've read the book online to say that it's been written very, very well. I know.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think that's just a good point for me to say, to also add some very positive feedback, and just to encourage everyone to make sure that they download and read your book. I've shared the links a couple of times, and please anyone email me if they're struggling to download them. But it's a really incredible piece, as you say, made up of a number of different styles of writing and fragments. And you've also contributed to the Big Walk publication as well. And I think that we're all looking forward to asking you some questions and hearing a bit more during the panel. But again, just with regards to time constraints, it would be great if we can, like I said, have a bit of a discussion with you, because there's so much more to unpick. So I'd like to hand over to Femi, if that's okay with you, Victor.
That's fine, thank you.
Perfect, thank you again. I'm going to hand over to Femi. I'm also going to make Femi the host, so he has the power and can keep an eye on any questions coming through for you, Victor, and this evening's other panellists. So thank you, and to Femi.
Hi there, you can hear me. So my name's Femi, and I'm a writer, musician and audio producer, and it's an absolute honour to have been invited to host this conversation today. So I got thinking about why I tell stories, and the title of this discussion is Detention and Displacement, the Power of Storytelling. And so when I compose, write, or produce audio, a lot of my work is about hearing and telling stories to pretty much anyone who wants to listen. And in so much of the work that I do and the work that I really enjoy, it's about like interviewing people or performing folk songs to an audience. And I think storytelling is something that we're predisposed to do, but where does this come from? I think it takes bravery to tell the stories of our most private and painful experiences, but they're ones that I think through which we can all collectively learn and grow. And in my own family, it's been really hard squeezing those stories out of my parents, but my mum was born in Lagos in the 60s and grew up with her auntie until one day her parents returned and took her to England. And the tellings of her stories of migration and of displacement and coming to London in the 70s are always very fleeting and short. And so there's a lot of imagination that needs to be done. And I often imagine her newly arrived and small between the grey of the airport tarmac and the cloudy sky, a black child in this strange new grey world, unaware of the racism and the pain in building an identity for herself that lay before her. And if you fast forward to now, she has 4 children, I'm one of them, and we're all pretty embedded in British society. And our roots are shrouded in her silence, I think. And maybe it's this silence and seeing the fear my mum had of transmitting her own pain through the stories that she carried inside herself, which has prompted me to tell my own stories. I've never felt displaced or had to flee anywhere, and I can't imagine the inhumane programme of cruelty that this government is inflicting on the most vulnerable in our society. The wrongful detention of asylum seekers and migrants, which is going on in Lincolnshire, at Morton Hall, and around the country, is one that's hidden from the public. And as Steffi says in her intro to The Big Walk, art exclaims at and insists not just on the fact of the ground beneath our feet and the sky above our heads, but what is hidden and how we might make it visible. And I think this book here, The Big Walk, is a small step towards giving light to these stories. And I hope that over the course of this conversation, we'll all learn a little about the power that telling our stories can have. I'm going to start this panel discussion by giving the floor to each of our guests for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, just to introduce yourselves. I know some of you have already introduced yourselves, but maybe you, in your introductions, you'd like to talk about the theme of the conversation. And then I have a few questions to ask, but really I'd like to give this to the audience to get as many questions across. So if you want to ask a question, either put it in the chat or in the Q&A tab, and I will try and get around to as many as possible. And I think we should start with Tanya, who we haven't heard from yet. So Tanya, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. My name's Tanya Akrofi. I'm a writer and storyteller and a public speaker occasionally. I moved to this country with my parents when I was 5. So my father was a politician in Ghana, and things happen, and we sought asylum in this country. So my experience is very much about the displacement that takes place in the country of origin. So how we had to be separated as a family while we were getting our papers together. And then the experience of coming to this country and integrating in a whole new culture. I then studied to be a lawyer. Immigration and benefits and family law was my thing. But I think ultimately it was hearing people's stories and then having to represent their stories for their benefit. Got me very interested in that side of things. And so now I am an oral storyteller. I share my own stories. I create space for other people to share their stories. And I write, whenever I can, short stories, flash fiction, poetry that reflects the experiences that are my own lived experience, but those of people I've come into contact with. And Steffi brought me onto this project to use my own experiences and my ideas of how storytelling could be a tool to represent migrant experience. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing, thank you very much, Tanya. Natasha, would you like to say something about this theme of the power of storytelling and maybe how it, well, yeah, I'll just give you the floor for a few minutes just to talk about the tagline of the discussion.
Thank you. I'd love to say something about it, and I'll also say in that context a little bit more about me that I didn't want to say before people saw the film. So about telling the stories, I find it really inspiring what Victor said, and of course I find it really interesting because I never thought I would write a book about it. And of course Victor wrote a book about it because it's incredibly, there is power in telling the story. You know, it's something that establishes the agency and something that tells the world, like, why would anyone be defined by the story that came from outside, the story that isn't fair? So you establish your own story, you give the agency, you give the truth, but also it's an act of rebellion. And it does have its own power. It does reach people. And I'm not saying that it will change hardcore, maybe super right wing or somebody who has fascist views. I won't go as far to say that it will. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. But it can change people's mind, or people who sit somewhere in between, or people who just go through life and maybe don't think about those things, and who need to actually meet somebody, a real person, not somebody who is a title, you know, from a newspaper, from propaganda. And some of these elements have been important to me, why to tell my own story. And the story is I was born in former Yugoslavia to a mixed Serbian and Croatian background. And when the civil war started in the early 90s, I escaped to Greece, to Athens. I didn't think I would stay long, but I ended up staying 6 years, during which I was stateless, because when Croatia formed itself, even though my mother is Croatian and I was born in Croatia and I applied for Croatian citizenship, I wasn't granted it because my last address was in Serbia, my father was Serbian, and when I applied for citizenship in Serbia, they wouldn't give it to me because I was born in Croatia, to a Croatian mother. And so it's the story of statelessness, of powerlessness, but I've been proudly telling it all my life and given myself the power through migration, through refusal at borders, through constant no, we don't want you to live here, and so on and so forth. And it has made me stronger. And also, just to say quickly, something Victor said, like, I was only 5 days in there. It doesn't matter. It's just the taste of the horror, the taste of the experience that is really important. I was watching a documentary about Behruz Buchani's life and his experience of statelessness, and it really shook me to the core, even though my experience of statelessness was much, much, much milder than his. With every fiber of my being, I knew what he was talking about. So it's really important to share those stories.
Definitely, thank you very much. I think maybe we'll go to Jane next. We've got some questions coming in. We'll just let everyone say a few bits and then maybe I'll ask this question to Victor. So Jane, would you like to say anything about the power of storytelling?
Wow. Yeah, I think it's so important to be able to hear these stories, because there we are just in our day-to-day, going from A to B, from work to school to home, to work to school to home. Very blinkered we can be in our existence. And it's so important to have these doors opened to us. For me, from my perspective, I haven't been through any of these terrible hardships. I'm fortunate enough to have not been displaced or had any of these things happen to me. And that was a big thing for me, for not, what's my voice got to say about this? What can I, authentically bring to this conversation? But that's just it, is hearing other people's stories, really opening your mind to these individuals, everyone as an individual.
Definitely, yeah. There's a question in from Gina for Victor. So maybe, as you've already introduced yourself, Victor, maybe I'll just start off with this question. And it says, hello, good to see you there. Who do you think would most benefit from reading your book, and who would you most like to read it?
Hi, thank you. I just hope as many asylum seekers as possible and refugees would read it, but it's for anybody really, particularly because I've written that book in Britain, so it's also for the larger British public. I got an email this morning from somebody who was, he made quite a very good comment about the description I made of the inside of Vulcan Hall, which is the immigration reporting center, where people then when they get arrested to be taken to an immigration removal center, nobody had had that insight before. He had information about what happens at that point in time. So it's not only for asylum seekers and refugees, but it's also for the larger British public, so that they have insight into what goes on, even in the immigration removal centers like Morton Hall.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and I'd just like to come back to Tanya, I think, and just ask, because you're a storyteller, how can art or storytelling itself be a form of resistance, or even a form of healing, I suppose? And is that something that you've thought about?
Yes, very much. I went to a lecture at Mansions of the Future, actually, and the artist was talking about how collaboration is a form of resistance, how the more we come together, you know, the more we create an impenetrable community, the harder it is for us to be, for members of our community to be marginalized and treated in certain ways. So I think that the first step towards any kind of active or effective resistance is the coming together. It's the seeing each other as the same, as members of the same family, and seeing the similarities, but celebrating the differences as well. Those things that make it harder for us to view another as other. Those things that make us see the basic things that unite us. That is what's going to bring us together. And there, once we are together, we can properly formulate resistance against the things that would oppress members of our family. And so listening to each other and actively listening as well. This is one of the things about being a storyteller and creating space for people to share their stories, is teaching people how to listen, because we're very used to having conversations where we're just waiting for our turn to talk. But that thing where someone is unfolding something very personal about themselves, and they know that the ears around them are open and the hearts are open, it makes a better storyteller, and it makes the process of storytelling a continuously collaborative one. And I do think within that there is a very strong engine for change, because once we're all playing on the same team, it's very hard to separate us and to divide us in ways that, you know, mean that a lot of people get harmed, and we'll all see it as, you know, we're all being harmed. That's the hope.
Definitely, thank you so much for that. And we've got a comment from Rosie which says, love that on collaboration. That's the principle these Walls Must Fall campaign is based on: whole communities against detention, not just those at risk. And yeah, it got me thinking about Natasha and Jane, your collaboration on the beautiful film that we just saw earlier. And I think it was absolutely amazing. And sort of the fact that it was meant to be this walk. And obviously there's quite a big connection, a historical connection between pilgrimage and walking and storytelling. And I just wanted to ask you both about what the thinking about the importance of bringing walking and storytelling together, and why that's important for the act of telling our stories, maybe.
Jane, do you want to start, and then I'll...
Okay, yeah. Well, okay. When we meet together and walk, a bunch of people who don't know anything about each other, you're walking, you're distracted, there's things around you to look at and to talk about, to strike up that small talk. And then that's how these relationships grow, isn't it? the process of walking is so, it releases all of that tension. We're meeting in a bar. If we all met together in a bar in Lincoln, which we, that would be nice, wouldn't it? There would be people that would be quiet and wouldn't want to talk. I'd be one of those. And when you're walking, you form little groups, and you might have little private discussions together. So yeah, I think the whole walk was going to be a really special thing. So hopefully, well, I think the film is very special. But yeah, Natasha, help me.
Yes, completely agree, and also completely agree with what Jane said, and very much with what Tanya said as storytelling and collaboration. And I mean, because I am a performance artist, for me, storytelling often is a conversation with the audience in one way or another. And I think what that allows is that personal relationship makes it non-confrontational in a way. And also what it allows the space for hugely is when you're sharing stories of displacement or difficult experiences or horror in a personal relationship through a walk or any other project that is maybe out there in the street, those stories become stories of power and transformation, because displacement is not only about the trauma, it's about transformation and empowerment and learning. It's both about pain and pleasure, as academics have written about, and writers like George Lemming or Edward Said and many others. And it's also through storytelling as a conversation, we have this amazing power to create meeting points, and this collaboration with Mentions of the Future and Justice, Arts and Migration Network has built up on my project Welcome Town that I had in Lincoln and Stockton last year. And that was also a conversational project, performance installation in the center of the city, asking questions and challenging the audience in a way, how can towns in England be truly welcome? And one of the activities was very playful, very conversational. It was a quiz created in a very playful way, and most people made 5 mistakes out of 5 questions and were shocked by the correct answers, and made to think, and lots of times said, well, this is shocking, we can actually do better as a country. I personally will start doing something about it tomorrow. For me, that's an incredibly powerful act of conversation, of storytelling.
Definitely. And I suppose another thing that I was thinking about, especially reading Victor's writing, Victor, there's a moment where you say, it's as if I didn't deserve to breathe the same air as the British, and yet my country, Zimbabwe, has the 2nd largest white European origin populated in Africa. And I think one of the things that made me think about is this sort of systematic historical amnesia, or the forgetting of a colonial past. And I just wonder if one of the tasks of storytelling is to rewrite our histories, and to sort of rewrite those, that sort of historical amnesia that's happened. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, Victor.
Well, I believe when I wrote that phrase, I was thinking more of migration and the barriers that are placed on people, so that at times they are unable to move to places of their choice. Because I'm one of those people who believes that a person should choose to believe to live anywhere they want on this planet, because we share this planet, just like what Tanya said. It's all for us, and migration has been taking place since the beginning of time, really. And there was a massive migration that took place from Africa into other parts of the world. And even when Europeans came back to Africa, that was also a form of migration. So there shouldn't be any barriers or any limits to people who should, when they choose to go to any part of the globe, they prefer to live. And so I was actually commenting on that to say that it looks like it's a privilege for other nationals to go wherever they want, but not with people in my situation who can who find themselves with barriers and impediments when they desire to move to wherever they want to go.
Thank you very much. So I've got another question from the floor, and in a second I'm gonna open it up to everyone. If you do, I am able to apparently allow you to talk. So if you'd like to talk, put your hand up in the audience. I think you can click a raise hand button, and I shall try and allow you to talk, and we'll see if that works. I just wanted to ask just another question to Jane, actually, and I guess also to this is sort of an open question to everyone, but the sort of oral tradition of storytelling and keeping our stories alive is something that we've done for centuries. And especially with Jane, what made me think of it was the use of the sort of English folk song, which you've both printed one in the book, as well as using the English Country Garden song in the film. And I just wanted to ask how we can take stories that have been passed down to us orally and repurpose them to like our situation now, or to talk about the world around us. Is that something that you thought about?
I don't know. I suppose a book that I read for my master's study was The World in 7 Songs. So I suppose my perspective is more from a music. Coming from a music tradition rather than a storytelling, but the two are obviously very linked. But the World in 7 Songs describes how human beings have evolved as a result of these 7 archetypal song types. For example, the love song, the rebellion song, etc., etc. And so many of these songs are captured in traditional folk music, which I love exploring. Folk music traditions, not just from the UK, but from everywhere around the world. But yeah, and that's, for me, that is a great way of passing on these oral traditions. The song that I included in the book was one that I was going to incorporate as part of the walk from episode to episode. There's quite some distance between some of those episodes, so I thought it would be fun for us to learn a song together. So I was going to teach by rote that song that's in the book, which just goes back to 1870 or something, and it was a song about this guy's lover's been put on a government ship. And she's going to be 10,000 miles away, and he just wants to leave England and find her. So these things have been going on for centuries, but why have we not moved on? Why have we not, that's sort of 300 years ago. We need to be better than that now, surely, and thinking differently. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you. And I know that, Victor, you also included a sort of Shona folktale in your book, and I just wondered if that tradition of folklore, if you had anything to say about using the oral tradition, or like these stories that would have been told to bring our current situation to light.
Well, storytelling, like what other panelists talked about earlier, it's all about, in the past really, it even up to now, it was used as a way of educating, teaching, cultural norms and what have you, before the invention of writing, and even during when writing was invented, and it was mechanized into printing. So in African society, the mode of passing on information or education was through oral, or it was the oral tradition, and the storytelling was very much part of that tradition. So that makes me think about the use of language in storytelling. These days, I've written these stories in English. English is not my first language. My first language is Shona, which is the language that is spoken in Zimbabwe. But one of the advantages, if you want to call it, of colonialism was the introduction of the English language. And that opened up all the communication links through the use of the English language on a much wider scale. I doubt it if I had not learned this English language, if I would have written these stories and everybody would have read them at all. But the use of the English language expanded and opened up the communication at a much wider scale. And this is how I was able to talk about the tale of the rabbits and the baboons, which I heard in Shona, in my own vernacular language, not in English, and I just re-narrated it in the English language, and I drew parallels with the asylum system, how it operates, the way the baboons were tricked by the rabbit, which is very much the way we seem to be treated during the asylum system, with all these immigration laws and regulations and the like.
Thanks very much. We haven't got very long left, so I think Rosie has had her hand up for a little while, so I'm going to allow you to talk now, Rosie. So I'll do that. Has that worked? I think you might be muted.
Hello, I don't think I put my hand up deliberately.
Oh, great. All right, would you like...
Hello, anyway.
Would you like to ask anything?
No, you put me on the spot now. I've been enjoying listening a lot.
Okay. Okay, all right, goodbye. Thank you.
That was a scratch.
Oh, and then I'm going to allow Elvis to talk.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Thanos, Victor. Probably I've got a question. I think he had already elaborated on the question that I had. It was with regards to the Shona folktale that he probably put in the book, which was the Sura and Gudo. So I wanted an extrapolation of whatever you meant with that, but I think he has already alluded to the connotation of what he intended with that folktale. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Would you like to say anything more, Victor, or I can pass? Would anyone else like to comment on that sort of the use of oral storytelling? I wonder, Tanya, when you're doing storytelling workshops, can I maybe ask a bit about the process that you go through and when you're working with people to teach them to tell stories?
Yes, well, I have found that people, obviously we come in from our everyday lives, and the first thing to do is to do an icebreaker, and I usually use something that's a little bit mystical or magical. So I imagine that I'm raising a circle the way you traditionally would in a coven or something, and I light a candle and we all set an intention as a group. And the aim of the first few minutes is to get everyone to relax, to leave the outside world there, and to allow the kind of mysticism of the circle take hold. So there is singing, usually to relax the voice and also to allow people to bring their voices into the circle so that they feel that the circle is created with a part of them. And then there is there is eye contact, which enables people to see who they're in the space with and connect with people, even if just for a moment, because the idea of going in cold, share a story about your childhood, go, is just not one that would work. So there are steps that have to be taken, almost like a hypnotic trail into a space where everyone, you can notice their shoulders have lowered, their bodies are receptive, and they themselves, you know, have warmed up voices and are ready to be in that space where they're able to listen and able to share comfortably. And then we take turns in telling stories, usually put a 3-minute slot in small groups, and then we come back to the bigger group and people share as they're comfortable. So at every stage, it's about people's comfort, but it's also about anchoring with singing and with voice, so that people feel that kind of natural and authentic connection to what's being created. So yes, voice, presence, connection, tactile connection with people, if people are comfortable with that, all those things that allow us to settle into the space and do what is necessary.
Thanks very much, Tanya. And we've got a question from Jim, but there's a question that's come in which I think maybe is still on the theme of what you're talking about. They've said, thank you so much. I agree on what was said on the power of storytelling as a healing tool, an act of rebellion, and a tool of human collaboration. Do you organise workshops with children and schools in order to reach this idea of enriching the history?
Yes, sorry, children are the group that I like working with the most. I like the adult one because yes, obviously working with adults means that you can tackle things that are a little bit deeper or sensitive with people's permission. But I do work a lot with children, and what we do is we create story maps. So I do the whole welcoming thing still, and we take the mystical kind of energy of being in a circle, and this is a space different from the regular everyday. But what we do is we create story maps. So I tend to, where we want to go, where we're starting out, we draw little boxes and then we draw lots of pictures. So as well as using voice to anchor children into the space of storytelling, we use other things. So making collages, things that they can touch as well, colors, drawing, anything like that. And at the end of it, each child usually has a map, a story map. And those that are brave enough are able to stand up in front of the rest of the group and talk about their maps. They have it as a tool, as a prop, if you will. But from that, very often children will place the map down and just tell the story from their memory of creating it. So working with children is one of the things I enjoy the most. And storytelling has been found to be a gateway to literacy. So I'm often invited into schools to help children who are having a problem with reading, and we use the oral traditions of storytelling to help them find books that they would like to read. So yes, is the short answer.
Amazing, and thank you to Fatma for that question. And Jim has a question as well to all the panelists. How do we challenge the fake stories of the more powerful? Do we challenge them, ignore them, or write counter stories? Would anyone like to respond to that? If not, I'll pick on someone. Natasha.
It's a difficult one, but I think I mean I can say how I tackle them. It's I tackle them through personal stories, through challenging stories. I like doing it in a provocative way, especially in the performance space, because I have people there. It's unlikely they will just walk out. So it's a great space to just go directly with some challenging issues. As somebody, so if we are talking, for example, fake stories in terms of migration and foreigners, you know, I'm somebody with a foreigner, maybe, you know, I blend in, I could be English until I open my mouth. As soon as I open my mouth, I'm foreign. So I'm that danger, like get to know me here. I'll ask you that, figure out if I'm dangerous and how dangerous I am. So it's using, for me, it's through a combination of personal, challenging, playful, factual, So facts on their own don't work, but if in the right place we throw in good facts, they are really quite shaking. You know, just a simple fact, UK, one of the most powerful countries in the world, has less than 1% of refugees of the whole world. 85%, I think 85% of refugees are actually in what is called, undeveloped countries. Yes, 85%. Things like, what is the education background of people who arrive? Just plain facts that nobody knows, like a foreign educated doctor costs £25,000 to become a doctor in the NHS system. It's literally just about teaching them the system. A born and bred English doctor costs the country £250,000. If a fact like that is thrown into more poetic or challenging material, it works. But also through the use of folk stories and something that tells us that the past repeats itself. I've used in my work stories of horror and gore from narrative Serbian epic poetry a few hundred years old, that, where lots of stories are pretty horrific. War stories, one-to-one stabbing stories, all of them are really horrible for women. And I've used them very effectively to challenge, why are women seen as weak and not capable through stories like that? For example, there are stories about building live women bodies into bridges and significant buildings to ensure that they will last for hundreds of years. So the power of a live woman's body is needed to secure the strength and length of life of a building, but in life they're seen as weak and powerful. If a woman has a baby, a bridge will be built around her breast so that she can feed the baby as long as she's alive. So I've used really horrible stories like that to comment on what it is like to be a woman today. And so a mix of all those things. But similar to what I said earlier, a really hardcore, somebody who really, really believes in fake stories, I think it's really hard to change their perceptions. So we are working around people who are not interested enough, who are not sure, who are open to hear something different.
Thanks very much. Yes, Victor, would you like to also respond?
I've had a little bit of time to think about Jim's question. Yes. It's a very important question. The power of storytelling can be used and should be used to challenge some of these perceptions. And this is one thing I've really appreciated about staying in Britain. Yes, I've had a very nasty experiences that one wouldn't wish on anybody. But having stayed here, I've had a lot of support from people who don't support whatever is happening in terms of mistreatment of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And this is in vast contrast to some countries, particularly countries from which I come, where if you voice your concerns, you challenge some of the things that are undemocratic, the end result is being thrown into detention, killed, in some instances, mistreated and what have you. But here, despite the fact that there are, you can meet up with a system that is very, very powerful, where the influence is so big and powerful people can use vast resources, it still can be challenged. And one way to do that is to challenge that through writing, storytelling, and what have you. And I bet you, if I'd been in Zimbabwe, probably that story wouldn't have been published. I would have been languishing in jail now. So that's the difference.
Absolutely. Jane or Tanya, would you like to respond to that question? Yes, please do.
I was going to say, let me take these off, that one of the reasons that I made the career change from law to oral storytelling was that I think that even though I believe that all human beings are storytellers, I think it's a redundant term to call myself that, because we all are. What we really desperately need is more people holding the space. So we can't challenge the really big stories. Like Natasha says, we can't change entrenched views. But what we can do is have individual stories highlighted constantly. So people's real lived experience, things that have happened in people's past, what have led them to making the decisions they're making currently. I think the more we hear of each other's stories, the more we can start to see that there are no others, there is no difference. And so those of us who can, I believe it's imperative at this time for us to hold space for stories to be told, shared, heard, explored in whatever medium storytelling manifests itself in our lives. I think that's the only way we can have any hope of challenging the monolith that is fake news.
Thank you so much, Jane. Yes.
Yeah, just a tiny thing to add to. I agree absolutely with everything that Tanya and Natasha have said, and Victor. I think a way of doing that, the world is saturated, our world is saturated with mass media and music that is broadcast and pumped to us on our radios. I think the best way is to encourage everybody to be creative and to have a voice through their creativity, whatever means that is, whether that's writing, storytelling, music, street performance, am I allowed to say graffiti? Just be creative, use your voice in whatever way you can.
Thanks very much. I think we're running short on time. So Steffi, did you want to pop back in to wrap up?
I was actually, Femi, I was just going to post this, which has got some podcasts including your stories, but I'm not sure whether I know how to post it. So, yes, soon.
And just to say, Steffi, sorry to jump in, if there are any resources such as the podcast you've just mentioned or anything else from any panellists, I can share those with all of the attendees today through Eventbrite. So please just send it to me. I'll make sure that I do that. If at the latest by early next week.
Yeah, okay, that's great, because Femi hasn't told us about the wonderful podcast he made last year, so we'll make sure we...
Yes, I did. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me and being involved in this panel discussion. And I think, well, maybe that'll draw it to a close. And Steffi, if you wanted to take over.
Okay. Well, yes, thanks from me too. It's been a really, really good evening, and I'm very grateful for everybody's contributions and for everybody who's come in. I can see lovely names like Ananda and Paul and lots of Abigails, all the wonderful Abigails, some really lovely names, and it's just made this year come to a sort of a little bit of a good pause in what I know has been a really hard time for everybody. Thanks particularly, of course, to our editor, Alison Smith, who is with us, I think, with Victor for all your contribution, both through your own book, but also in contributing to The Big Walk, to Natasha and Jane for their extraordinary artistry, for Tanya for being always brilliant and always there for all of us and just making things that little bit more hopeful, and to Colette and her team at Mansions for just being extraordinarily professional. Colette exemplifies professionalism, as I'm sure everyone knows just by being here tonight. So thank you again. Please do download the books. As I said, I'm sorry we've only got a short print run of these, but believe me, we did send them to good influencers, and you know that's really the idea, that we get them to people. And please feel free just to send the links far and wide, as in wherever you like. We've saved a book for Beirut, Victor, and I was sending that to him in Christchurch, or I'm sending it to him in Christchurch, and Omid of course knows about it too, so he will also get a copy. And Hoda Afshar, who I don't know if you do know, but Femi and Colette and I know her, and so does Tanya. So she's also a very wonderful artist and the friend of Omid and Beirut's, so she's also going to get a copy. So I think that's it from me. As Colette said, please do fill in the questionnaire. I know people are always asked to do this, but it is actually really helpful to us because it allows us to talk back to in our cases, we're very fortunate, very supportive institutions, but nonetheless, we need to talk back to them to say that the kind of work we want to do with the people we want to do it is of value to people out there in the wider community. So that's why we ask for that. And so thank you, and have a lovely evening, and I hope to see you all in the real world on a walk soon.
Thank you, guys. It was really nice to talk to you all.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And this is maybe one of the answers to how we do it, like this, cross-disciplinarily, you know, mix various knowledge and skills to reach, you know, farther and stronger.
Thank you, everyone. Just to echo everything that everyone said, and just to bring everything to a close, basically. And again, this recording is going to be available via the websites as well soon. And again, please feel free to rewatch Jane and Natasha's film. And again, download the books, fill in the survey, and we'll be in touch with some more resources for you all. So I'm going to end this Zoom, and everyone enjoy your evenings. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.